Hey everybody, we are still here at ng-conf. We are talking to Igor Minar.
Hi there.
Now, I'm assuming that most people who use Angular and pay attention to the conferences know who you are, but do you want to just give a brief introduction anyway?
I don't think everybody knows me, and that's fine.
Uh-huh.
I'm one of the first engineers on Angular. I'm a tech lead on Angular. I lead several of the efforts. I've been on Angular since the very beginning, AngularJS,
Right.
Angular. I work at Google and have a lot of fun with Angular and Angular community.
Nice. Now, you gave a talk yesterday about SEO, which I thought was interesting. I think usually we kind of think about at least for me anyway, I think about the core team as working on core team stuff, right? And not actually building Angular apps and doing a lot of that stuff.
Yes and no. We need to do things like this just to get a first-hand experience of what we are building. And for me, working on Angular IO, even though it's a side project, it's been very good learning experience to just see how things work or don't work, and then that feedback is used to improve Angular itself. And along the way, we try different experiments, like is our application indexable by different crawlers? And sometimes we learn things that we didn't know about, and then my talk was about the experience and sharing the experience with the rest of the community.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's interesting, too, you took the approach of not necessarily doing server-side rendering, which I think when we talk about SEO with things like Angular or even React Vue, a lot of those communities are, well, you just do the server-side rendering and you're kind of good, right? So what made you take the other tack?
Yes, but how many of us do really want to run servers just to support indexing and crawlability? My approach was, we are a very small team. This is not a primary product. This is not. It's very important to us, but it's not what we do as a primary job. And I think there's many people in the community that are in the same position where they are trying to build applications. They are a small team. They need to pick their battles and they're trying to do their best, but they don't necessarily have the resources to run servers and do server-side rendering. And what I thought would be interesting, let's see if we can prove that this can actually work without the server-side rendering. And we learned, interesting things that we surfaced, but I think overall we are successful. We get 1.2 million visitors a month to our site, and now we shared those learnings with the community, and we see that there are gaps. Like one of the things that I mentioned in my talk is the search results are really good with ask.com and google.com, but there are other crawlers that have a hard time crawling our site without the server-side rendering, and this is something that nobody really knew for sure. And what I see is I don't really understand, there's very little information about the implementation of crawlers. And even though I'm a Google employee, all of this stuff was done. I'm not affiliated with the search team. I was basically a regular developer building an application, trying to see what the Google crawler does and other crawlers do. And what I realized is there are other crawlers that cannot crawl our site. And if we want to reach the audience there, it's on us to do the extra work. So there are trade-offs, and you should understand those.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it was interesting talk. It was a really short talk, too.
It's 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
I tried to pack as much as I could. That's why I left lots of links to postmortems and issues that we fixed, and because there was not enough time to go into many details. But I think for most, just knowing that there can be a site out there without the server-side rendering that can get a lot of traffic is enough evidence for them to dive deeper and then figure it out. And it's actually not that difficult. Really, the biggest thing that we had to deal with was figuring out the polyfill story, what polyfills to load for the crawler, and the rest was relatively smooth.
Yeah, pretty much everything you had in your talk, I didn't feel like I had to look at too hard to figure it out, so...
Yeah, really, many people get turned off because they just try it and it doesn't work, not realizing that polyfills is really the only issue that they need to get over. And once they do that, then there are a few things that you can tweak to improve the experience for users, but you can get really good results with just dealing with polyfills.
Makes sense. Now, are you speaking at all during the rest of the conference?
I have several panels and stuff today, but I don't have more speaking engagements.
Cool.
I'm busy shipping V6 and preparing the release. So
Yeah,
I
that's
try
exciting.
to minimize the amount of preparation for the conference as much as I could.
Awesome. Now, one thing that I wonder about a little bit, and I think some other people are unclear on, is it seems like you and Mishko and Brad are all leaders of the team, and I know you all kind of fill different roles. Do you want to just explain how that works and the relationship that you guys have?
I can try. Mishka is really focused on the very core of the framework, the rendering bits, the presentation in the keynote where we showed off Ivy stuff, like that's his domain expertise. What my expertise is, making sure that the public API surface is something that developers would like to use, making sure things work correctly. So the bigger picture,
Right.
outside of the core, how do we integrate it with material? How do we pull in the CLI? Making sure that the size is very good. So making sure the packaging format and the way we publish stuff to NPM, all of that stuff is usually on me. And Brad is the engineering director. He's usually in charge of high-level strategy and partnerships and stuff like that.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm just going to take a minute really quickly. Kendo UI sponsored the interviews, and so I just want to call out briefly on their behalf and let people know that if they're looking for specific types of visual elements and components, handy stuff to put in your app that you don't want to have to invent yourself, go check them out, kendoui.com, and just give them a hearty thank you for paying for the interviews.
Thanks.
One thing that I am curious about, and one thing that I've kind of been trying to do in these interviews, is give people an idea of who the speakers are. And so do you want to just talk briefly about sort of who you are outside of work and outside of Angular?
Outside of Angular, I really like outdoors, and I'm an introvert, which is very interesting because being at a conference like this where everybody wants to talk to me puts me in a very interesting position. I like talking to people, but it's very draining for me personally. Right. So like today I went for a run and it was great. So outside of Angular, it's a lot outdoors. I have kids. I love spending time with my family. And then traveling, food. I like food. Good food. Yeah.
Nice. Good food. What have you tried here in Salt Lake that you've liked as far as food goes?
I had a really good dinner with John Lindquist from Agrid.io at a French restaurant here downtown.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the name is, but I like French cuisine. So
I'll have to get a referral from him. John lives about a mile from me.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
Yep. Very cool. So what expectations do you usually come to ng-conf with?
Survive, to be honest. I mean, it's usually pretty crazy for us before these big events because, preparing talks, making sure that we have enough to show in keynotes and making sure things work and people come and have a good time. It takes a lot of preparations and energy and just things get pretty crazy the few days before, especially the last few days before the conference. But usually for me, like once the first few talks are done, like that's when we relax and we know like it's going to be good. People are having a good time and that's important for us and
good.
We're happy.
That's really interesting. I mean, I can imagine that it's really wearing, I come to these conferences. I'm not at the center of things, right? And a lot of demands put on you. So.
I really like it when people approach me in the hallways and just tell me about their experience with Angular. I like to hear those stories. Even though I said, I'm an introvert, so it's draining, but at the same time, like, this is the opportunity for us to get feedback firsthand.
Right.
And this is why we come to these events, to be with the community, hear firsthand what they have to say, and then take that experience to a daily work. And when we are making decisions, like, I remember the discussion that we had, and we adjust our thinking. Like, one of the things we announced in this conference was that we combined the releases of the framework, material design components, and the CLI, and Angular v6 is the combination of these three releases together,
Right.
everything working together. And this came out of feedback we got at Angular Connect last year, where we talked to developers and like, yeah, it's great that you're doing all these things, but we never know which version to use with what.
Right.
So, and also like, what about LTS? You provide LTS for the framework, but not for the CLI. My company is not going to allow me to use the CLI if there's no LTS long-term support for it. So we're like, okay, that's, that makes sense. We didn't think about this, and we wouldn't get that feedback if we were not there with the community members and discussing these things with them.
Yeah, when it was announced that you were going to align the version numbers, I almost stood up and just started screaming with glee. Because, between the podcast and then just doing stuff on my own, it's like, well, I'll just grab the latest of everything, but I don't know where the compatibility issues exist.
Right. So now it's clear, and we have some more plans to make it even easier for people to understand, how to use packages and releases. So this is one of the things, like getting started with Angular and making sure that you are up to date with the latest version of Angular. It's easy to update. Like we spend so much time just thinking about these things, but it's so worthwhile because at Google, we just use the latest version all the time. That's what we use. We don't use version 4 or 2. Like, it's always the master, the head on GitHub. That's what Google uses. So for us, supporting even v5 now, it's extra work we're doing for the community. Like Google gets no benefit out of it because nobody uses that version at Google anymore.
Oh, okay.
But we understand that not everybody can move as fast as we can at Google. We have a lot of infrastructure that helps us stay up to date all the time.
Right.
So making sure that the updates are smooth and easy will help people stay as close to the latest version as possible and keep pace with Google and what we're doing.
So what kind of infrastructure do you have set up to do that?
I could give a 2-hour talk on this because it's pretty insane. So the way we work on Angular, like everything's open source. We work on GitHub first. All the issues, all of the pull requests, all the changes happen on GitHub in open, and we have external CI servers that test. We have 100,000 tests and lots of tests, but the true test of the change is the internal CI at Google. And the way we do this is once pull request passes the external CI tests, then we test it against all the applications at Google. At Google, we have just one repository where all the source code lives, and there's only one version of Angular. And we update that version of Angular multiple times a day.
Oh, wow.
And every time we do it, all the other projects start using that version of Angular. Does it make sense?
Yep.
And we also have
in production or just for the tests?
So in production, if they push to production on that day, then that's what they get. There is no other versioning at Google. They always get whatever is in master, and that's why we feel pretty confident about what is in the master branch on GitHub, because it was already tested at Google. So once we have this pull request that passes external tests, we test it internally. We have a CI infrastructure that allows us to just, it's like pull request tests against pull request. We test against the real applications at Google. And we soon learn, does it work? It doesn't work. Usually it does. Sometimes we make a change that looked innocent on GitHub, but then we bring it internally to Google and we start breaking applications left and right. And that's when we know that we can merge this. But if the test pass, then we merge it to the master branch on GitHub and also bring it to Google right away. And as soon as we do, that's what the Google engineers start using. And this happens several times a day continuously. And just internally, we have infrastructure that can support this workflow.
That's cool. So have you ever broken something in production with an Angular release?
Yeah, it does happen. Like we move pretty fast, and even with great test coverage, there are times when something happens and test is missing or change looked innocent, or somebody was relying on behavior that we didn't consider to be public API, but they still relied on it. So yeah, sometimes it happens. It's not very common in those
Right.
cases. We just roll back the change. We usually recover very quickly.
Yep.
And yeah, but there were times when we took down a good chunk of Google engineering because of this system where everything is in a single repository, everything is connected. So if we make a really bad change, like so many things depend on Angular at Google that if we screw up in a big way, then everybody knows about it. And then people are pinging us like, hey, we cannot continue working. You have to fix this right now.
Right.
So it happened once that we had a major outage, and we learned a lot about how to prevent that.
Right.
But again, when I came to Google, I thought like, this system is crazy. It can never work. How can you have just one version of a software and keep it up to date? But what I learned over the years is that it keeps us honest about breaking changes.
Right.
We cannot make breaking changes in a painful way because if we want to make a breaking change, we need to deprecate the APIs, get people on the new API, and then after some time we can remove the old API. And this is not only good for Google, this is also good for external community because, breaking changes are painful. They prevent people from upgrading to the latest version.
Yep.
Whereas if we are more cognizant of this and focus on the smooth updates and deprecation and providing APIs as a replacement, providing tooling that can refactor the old code to the new one, like we did with RxJS v6. Like we spent, we helped the RxJS team quite a bit with v6 release. And one of the things we did is we baked in a whole compatibility layer that will allow you to use version 6 with code that requires the v5 APIs. We did a big cleanup in RxJS v6 that was very necessary. But if we just made the cleanup and said, here's a new version, nobody would be able to use it because all the libraries that are out there would be incompatible.
Right.
So we had to create a compatibility layer. And we also built tooling that allows people to refactor their existing RxJS v5 code to 6.
Oh,
so
nice.
You can just run it and refactor the code. This is what we used to get to Google on RxJS v6. So it's like all the fruits of the internal work, we try to expose it to external developers.
Right. And didn't Google recently bring Ben Lesh and a few other folks on board at Google to work on RxJS?
So Ben, Ben is on my team. He was at Google for some time, but he was working on a different project.
Oh, okay.
And just recently, we transferred him over to the Angular team. And he's primarily in charge of RxJS. He works on RxJS. And the way I see it, like we care a lot about RxJS, but we also want to keep it as an independent project.
Right.
Because there are so many other communities that depend on RxJS. We don't want to make it like RxJS is now Angular only.
Right.
I think it's for the success of that project, and because it's such a low-level library, it's very important that it's independent, and Angular just benefits from it rather than it becomes an Angular library.
That makes sense. And, we see a lot of sort of a collaborative instead of a, how do I put it, like a top-down siloed approach to a lot of this stuff, where instead of, RxJS being consumed in just what Angular needs it for, it's provided for a lot of things. Or, TypeScript is worked on a lot at Microsoft. It's basically a Microsoft technology, but there are engineers that work on TypeScript at Google. Yeah. And, so we see a lot more of this sort of collaborative approach where it's, I'm going to make sure that, we meet your needs, but we're also going to make sure that we meet the needs of the rest of the community as well.
And it's great when you see this kind of layering of technologies because that extends the reach of the technology. Like if TypeScript was specific to one framework or to one particular use case, it wouldn't be as popular as it is today.
Right.
Whereas if you get the layering right, then the technology by itself becomes popular, and then many other communities can benefit from improvements of the technology. Like the feedback we provide to the TypeScript team or the improvements we contribute to the TypeScript are then funneled to communities that are not Angular specific, and that's great. And also like those communities that they contribute to TypeScript, we get the benefits, and that's great. Yeah,
exactly. So the use cases that the Angular team didn't specifically come up with for TypeScript, maybe the Vue community or, certain segments of the React community or even Node.js, if you want to write some Node.js with TypeScript and have it transpile. Yeah, everybody benefits from those. Yeah. So, maybe you get a performance boost and somebody else gets something that is made a little bit easier, and that all comes out of the same thing.
Yeah.
So, one thing that I have never asked that I'm kind of curious about is we kind of got the origin story from Mishko when we started the podcast, but how did Angular go from sort of a toy project or something that he was working on into like an actual team at Google? Like how did you get formed into so now there's an Angular team, right?
Yeah, so Mishko started the project in his free time. It was the side project. I still remember the day when I was at his house for dinner, and he was like, I have this cool thing, and you need to see it. I was like, he started showing me. I was like, yeah, this looks pretty good. I was Java developer at the time,
right,
at Sun Microsystems, and doing server-side stuff. And I was like, this JavaScript thing is crazy. Like, why would anybody want to do? But then, I looked at it on GitHub, and I'm like, you know what? There is this thing that's been troubling me about the server-side rendering and server-side web development,
right,
which was like, I feel like I'm just working around the system to build the UI. Because on the server side, like, you like concatenate strings, and like it's all this like messy thing, and like you spit out this document, and it eventually it looks like a UI, but I feel like it was like a big hack, and I just didn't feel right. So then when I saw what Mishko was working on, like, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the technology that could be the right way to build user interfaces. And we stayed in touch, and eventually I decided to leave Oracle, because Oracle acquired Sun in the meantime. And I was like, well, if I go somewhere, I would like to try this crazy thing that Mishko's working on.
Right.
And by then, he just introduced it to Google, and some Google projects started using it. So I joined him to support that project, and we were embedded in Google Feedback. It's a product at Google. We were embedded as part of the team, and the two of us later spun off and created the Angular team. So that was the very beginning. We were part of a very different product, supporting that product by building the infrastructure to build the UI. And eventually other people started using Angular, so it didn't make sense for us to be embedded in that team.
Right.
And we just created Angular team. And then Vojta joined us, Vojtaina, the creator of Karma. And yeah, it was three of us. And the funny thing was that I'm Slovak, Mishko's Slovak, and Vojta was Czech. And before, when I was growing up, it was Czechoslovakia. So we feel very close with Czechs. So it was funny that it was like this Czechoslovak project at Google in the early beginnings. Now it's much more diverse. We have people from all over the place, but that's how we started. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. I have a friend that was a Mormon missionary in Czech Republic, like right after they split, and so there was a lot of border crossing, and how that all worked out. And
Yeah, but I mean the split was very peaceful, so it wasn't like a big drama.
Yeah, but if you're ethnically and culturally a little bit different, you want to run things your own way, and that makes total sense to me. So, yeah. Cool. Well, if people want to see what you're working on these days, is there a good way to follow you? I'm assuming Twitter, maybe a blog somewhere.
Yeah, I try to post anything Angular specific on Twitter. So you can follow me at Igor Minar. I started a Strava club, which I want to promote. So
Strava club?
Yeah, so Strava is it's like a fitness community app where if you are a runner or swimmer or cyclist, you can upload your activity and share it with others.
Okay.
So it was last year, I think, when we had the first ng run, where people from the conference joined us on a run here in Salt Lake City. And I thought that it was so great to just meet random people and just go for a run. So we did, and then we stayed in touch on Strava, and we like cheered for each other as we were doing our runs throughout the year. And I just actually this morning I ran with class, another person that we just met here at conference. I don't know him from anywhere else. We just go running together, and we've been following each other on Strava for a while. So that led me to an idea. Well, maybe other people would like to join us, at least virtually, if not in person. and Strava has this capability of creating clubs where anybody can join and contribute their activities. And
Oh, nice.
we compete. There are leaderboards, so you
Uh-huh.
can see like who ran the longest distance in a week or
Uh-huh.
longest activity. So yeah, if you like fitness and running or biking, look up Angular Strava Club and join.
Angular Strava Club. All right, we'll have to put a link to that in the YouTube notes and stuff.
Yeah.
Which is another Google technology. Do they use Angular at YouTube?
At YouTube?
Yeah.
Like Angular is used all over Google. And when you say YouTube, there are like so many different sub-projects.
Right.
I don't know the details. I wouldn't be shocked. I know that they used AngularJS for the longest time.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure what exactly they're doing now. I know that there's some Polymer in YouTube. I don't know how much.
Uh-huh.
Usually, the biggest projects that we are supporting at Google is the cloud effort. Cloudgoogle.com
Yep.
is all Angular and AngularJS. They're going through the upgrade right now. And Google Express is all Angular. I work very closely with that team. And there's like 600 projects at Google that use
Oh, wow.
Angular. So I don't even know about all of them. I usually just support some of the ones where we care a lot about the team, and we have good relationships because that helps us also see some of the problems in the real
Right.
world on big projects and take that feedback and use it to make Angular better.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming by and talking to me for a
Yeah.
few minutes.
Thank you.
And yeah, we'll put links to all of that stuff on
Cool.
the notes.
Cool.
All
Thank
right.
you. Bye.
Bye.